Okay, this is take two after finally figuring out my crap. Um, I'm doing this for templates and setting up defaults for better workflow. This is concepts and things that you can apply to give yourself, right when you start, you have everything you need. And if you want to adjust things based on, everybody's going to have a different workflow, so you don't have to necessarily mimic or copy what I do for my workflow. But just to kind of show you some things as far as, building a startup template, setting up, default settings for your MIDI tracks and audio tracks and things like that. And then, as well as, kind of setting up simple workflow things so that when you set them up now, you don't have to do them later. So we'll jump right into it. Let me fix a couple more things. Alright, so to get into it, one thing I'm going to do here is change a couple things. Just messing around with something. Alright, so to start with your basic setup template, you want to get essentially everything that you would like to have when you first open Live. It can be as simple as something like what I have, where I've got at least a drum rack, a MIDI track, audio track, things like that. I've got all of my output levels the way I want them. So say for instance I want every track to start at -10, so I'll start at one at -10. With MIDI, you don't have a volume track until you throw in an instrument, so I'll throw in an instrument just for that sake, and it's at -10. Perfect. I'll mess around with that here in a little bit. So I've got all of that ready to go, just how I like it. My ends, the look and feel of everything. I want to make sure my like my browser's open, and I want to have it on a specific thing. So if I want to do like immediately have drums open as soon as I open Live, the channel I want to have up front first. If I want to have my returns showing or not, things like that. Everything you want set up the second you open Live, and every knob that's turned, all of that will show. So you want to make sure that the way you want everything is ready. And then as soon as that's ready, all you gotta do is go to options, go to your preferences, go to file and folder, and it says save current set as default. You hit save. Right now I have I already have a default set. I'll overwrite it, say yes, and then if we were to close, show me what you got. Open up Live real quick. Well, not real quick, I guess. And so now everything I had set up is the way I'd done it. So that's how you set up a template. And like I said, you don't have to necessarily go by what I choose to do. You're certainly welcome to set it up the way you want to, and because everybody's workflow is different. So take a couple hours, sit down, kind of come up with a template idea of how you want things to be. You can have as many channels, obviously, in a normal set. Some people get a little extravagant, throw out groups and have their drum group and their bass group and things like that, but I'm a little minimal at this point because I've done that before, and it was more hindrance than anything. So starting with a clean slate and having just at least a little bit to work with is nice, and then you can move on. Speaking of moving on, we'll go a little bit into Live 10 collections. The new thing in Live 10 with a little organization in the browser, which I think is really nice, and as far as like a organizational tool, this is huge. Those who don't have Live 9 or Live 10, you can still kind of do some organization, especially with your your user library. You can certainly make folders and organize things in similar folders as far as samples, your instruments, things like that. And the categories is very well laid out. Plus, with Live 9 and the addition of the search feature, you can search for anything and it's fairly organized. But the concept of collections is that you can have both your whatever instrument you're working with, or I've got a couple instruments, a pack of samples, some drum synths, both Max for Live and VSTs, all kind of collected into one little space. So if I need anything drum related, no matter what type of sound I'm trying to go for, I have everything that I need. And the nice thing is I can just go through, and if I find something else that's like I've got an instrument here, and if I find something that's an actual instrument, I can go in and hit a button or right click and choose that's an instrument, and now it's in there. Although I have two of those for some reason, so I'll get rid of that one. If I want to add these to my effects, so all of these are really just effects, I can go in and effects. So these are all 5s. You get 5 and things like that. Oh, it's not an effect. So on and so forth. And then they're all there, all listed in that category collection, whatever. And you can do like favorites, like if you have favorite samples, or in my case, if I'm like working on a specific topic or idea for a stream or something, I can throw those in my favorites and recall them later. So I'm talking about defaults. Some things you could do as far as when you're wanting a new audio track or wanting a new MIDI track, things like that. Again, same thing with templates. You can set up your channel, MIDI track or audio track. You can set up your track how you want it every time you open up or insert a new track, essentially. So in this case with the MIDI channel, I already have an instrument. I think what I'll do in this instance is I'll use the new wavetable. And I want a couple of effects, just to have immediately, just to have some, playability with it, mess around with it if I'm trying to jam and have a good idea or something like that. So I'll throw on a couple things in here, like an arpeggiator, chord, scale maybe, even just to make sure I'm in scale. I can decide to scale. I'll turn them off because I don't want them to be immediate, so I can still play them. But still play a single note. But if I want to, throw an arpeggiator on there later, then I can. In fact, I'll just group these. I think I actually have my own. So I have a MIDI channel input. Alright, so I have it set up so it's a chain selector, and it selects it, and then the scale, things like that. When I turn it on, it works. The synced rate of the arpeggiator, the gate of the arpeggiator, things like that. Turn it off for now. Have that there in front of my wavetable. And some things that I tend to use, all for the most part, the utility. So bring the utility in if I want to change the stereo width or make it mono, or you know, have some kind of gain control there as well, you know, what have you. Also another type of mute thing, so separate from the mix channel and things like that. Oh, one thing I forgot to save is the utility on my master and a brief limiter. And this is a plus 7 gain. So in this instance, I'll just leave it the way it is. Not only will I resave my default template to have that. In fact, I wanted the drums first. That's what I mean by particular. It's really particular. And I didn't want the master open either. Meh. Okay. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Now when I go into my wavetable, and I can right click or control click on Mac and hit save as default MIDI track. And I already have one existing, but I'm going to overwrite it. Yes. And now let's delete the track, insert a MIDI track, and boom. Now every time I open a MIDI track, that's what I got. You know, I hit the MIDI channel with the MIDI effects, things like that. Wavetable, utility. Excuse me, all done. So every time I open a new MIDI track, that's what I have. And if I don't want, you know, I don't want the wavetable every single time, right? But I've got something to work with to start. You know, it's a basic sine wave. But if I want to use a different instrument, say I want to throw in a serum or something, I can go to my instruments, grab serum, just double click it, and boom, it overwrites the wavetable and throws in a serum. Done. Cool. Then I want new MIDI track, wavetable. Done. Audio track, same deal, exactly the same. You know, if I want to have certain effects on my audio track that I know I'm going to use every single time, or if I want to have like a couple of effects to mess around with, like say an EQ8, you know, I'm always going to EQ something, right? So I'll set up my deal, and in fact this is good, a good lead into my next topic of idea, and that's setting up default device settings, but I'll get into that here in just a second. We'll leave it on that curve. I want this to be a shelf, this to be a shelf, and I'll bring this down to about 100. About there. 4 can come down here. 5 can go up to about 2K. 6 around the higher frequencies. 7 with the shelf. Okay. And then I can turn all of these off. So I'm always going to have an EQ, or want an EQ, right? In fact, I could probably do one on my MIDI channel as well. I'll do it for the utility. I go instruments, wavetable. Okay. And in fact, I'll rename this because I might want to do like, you know, surgical EQ versus like the track EQ. So I'll rename this track EQ, utility. Okay. And I can right click, save as default MIDI, yes. And for this, I'll just do an EQ and a utility. Done. And save as default audio track. And now, again, insert an audio track. Now every time I have an audio, I get an EQ and utility available for me. And I'm good to go. Rename this. Track EQ. Perfect. Another thing you can do, say for instance, like I like to DJ using Ableton in the sense that I put sets together sometimes through live. It's not necessarily DJing. It's more like, organizing or arranging a set basically. But what you can do is you can set yourself up with some clips. So like what I'll do here is I'll take just a blank silence. Alright. There's a way you can insert silence. Yep, Control I. Oh. Oops. Well, let's just do this. Perfect. So I've got something, right? Oh, I didn't want to record. So I've got some blank audio. I'm going to change this to no input again, just to leave it like that. And say for instance I want to throw in like an EQ3. It's the similar thing to like just having 3 knobs, high, low, mid on a mixer deck for a DJ deck or whatever. And then I can take this clip, and what I'll do is I will rename it DJ deck, like that. And then what I can do is in my my user library, I've got clips right here, right? And I'll actually make a new folder. It'll be like utility tools, right? And I can take this, drag it right in, and now it's a ALC file or Ableton Live clip, right? Now I get rid of the deck. Let's throw the DJ deck in the arrangement mode. Boom. Now I have everything, including the EQ3, the utility, things like that, all available to me. And then all I gotta do is just take the whatever music or song that I want to start. And boom. Done. Or for copyright purposes, whatever. And then you have your... So something like that. As far as clips are concerned, what you can do is, again, just take the same just blank audio silence. That'll be your initial clip, but what you're really going for is saving the track, the default track, with all the settings and parameters you want to import, because once you just import that blank audio or blank MIDI, whatever, you have all the settings that you want for that specific task that you want. And again, because I saved audio track default, if I bring in a new audio track, then I have my EQ 8, which I wanted to rename track EQ. Oh, I'm being OCD. Sorry. And now I can save that default. Yes. Done. Cool. So we have that. Alright. And then digging a little deeper would be default devices. This is used to set up every time you import a device. You have all the settings that you want. Initially some devices come kind of with a preset, so that it automatically has some things enabled, or it has a look or feel that you have to change every single time. So like with the compressor, every time I import compressor, it automatically has makeup turned on, which I don't like. I want to be able to control the makeup rather than have it being automatic. Most of the time my attack settings are kind of high, so I might want to bring them up. And the ratio I can just leave alone. But the nice thing I like is I prefer this view of the compressor versus the other view, just for looks and workflow, in my opinion. Again, everybody's different, so it's not the same. And then if I like that, then I'll right click and save that as a default preset. And all your default presets are in your user libraries under defaults. So you have audio effects, compressor. If I had something, audio to MIDI, drums to MIDI, harmony to MIDI, melody to MIDI, I can set up in the track how I want things and then drag them in here, which we'll explain here in a minute with the drum racks. If I drop a sample, on the drum rack, what's it going to look like? The drum rack itself. So with my drum rack, every time I drag one in, actually, let me take that back. I meant to do this already. So with my drum rack, I've got Kong pads for my port rewire to Reason. That took me a little while to do, so I want to save that every time I bring in a drum rack. Now I can do that. New drum rack, there's all of my external instruments and things like that. So you're saving device settings and things you've done on the device as defaults every time you drag them in. So like with this EQ8, I want I want all of these different filter modes to be where they are, and they kind of, choosing the different locations for the nodes for where they're going to be, so I can quickly access them. They're kind of in, frequency range from low to top, so I know, okay, I want to turn the 4 on. I'm usually about mid-high, or, the high end of the low mids to low end the mid, the high mids, and, the upper highs, and the shelf to change that, and all sorts of things. I've got them turned off for now, because if I want to use them, I use them. If I don't want to use them, they're off. Not taking up CPU and things like that. And I also tend to use the track EQs like a filter, so I tend to like to automate the filter or the frequency cutoff, just to act that as a filter, things like that. And I will save that as the default preset. So now every time I bring in the EQ8, it's exactly what it looks like. So that's default device settings, and that's kind of like the steps of default things that you can kind of come up with. You got your overall template, how you import how you start live to begin with. You've got each track type, MIDI versus audio, having different default settings for each one, for when you import a new track, and then as well as each device. You can fine-tune the settings to how you like them in each device, and then just every single one, just right click and go down to save as default preset, and you're good. Or save as default audio track, or again in preferences for the template. save current set as default. The last thing I want to show you kind of revolves around the last couple things anyway. Setting up what you would do in case you like drop something into, for instance, a drum rack. So like, you know, by default, every time you drop a sample in, it comes in with a sampler. And so like, for instance, let's find a drum sound. Take a clap. All right, so I can drop in the sample here, and I've already kind of done this. I'll show you what I've done here. So let's just do that now. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've taken just this part of it. All right, so it's essentially a single sampler. Let's ungroup this. So what I did is I took a sample, I put the sample in a sampler. I did some, I changed it from classic to one shot. And I did trigger mode. There's no gain change. The volume changes is down here, so the output's volume. I could change the gain if I want, but I don't. But I can adjust that if I want to. I've warped it. I turned it to beats mode, and I put the preservation to transients. I changed the mode to off, which basically plays it and then stops. And then I have the envelope control, so like if I want to shorten the sample, to make it more snappy, I could do that. Just simple things like that. Set it up just exactly how I wanted. What I did is I grouped it, and I did a chain, and I did not delete it. I duplicated it. And one thing to note, just a random tidbit, is that anytime you duplicate two chains, you want the volume, each chain volume, to drop -6 dB. The reason why is that when you have both channels playing at the same time, the output level, gets exponentially louder. So you drop it down 6 dB, and it's about the same. It's a very there's no difference between the two as far as it's transparent. Is what I'm looking for, basically. So both sounds will play, and then you can process each sound differently to kind of give it some layered texture, things like that. It just sounds exactly the same. Plus, I can maybe map some macros, so I can map this to macro 1 to change the volume. So I have the chain volumes mapped together. If I want to change both of those, things like that. I'll actually unmap it. Bring this back to -6. What I can do though is maybe, can I map that? No, I can't. I'll map the frequency anyway. That sucks. I want to map that envelope, but I can't. Anyway, I'll dig into that myself a little bit later. But so now I control the frequency filter of both devices in one macro. And then what I'll do is just kind of take out the I'll set it the way I want it to look, and then all I gotta do here is go into my user library, dropping samples on a drum rack, and what I'll do is I'll delete this, and then I'll just drag this in here. It's just instrument rack. That's what I'm going to call it. And now, when I decide to drop a sample, even though it's not the same clap sample, what it does is it kind of recognizes what that's going to be like, and then applies it. Alright, and then I can, again, now I have 2 layers of the sample. I can kind of process them differently if I want to go in and, you know, kind of have one be dry, one have some kind of layer texture effect to it or whatever. I have that ability to kind of have like a parallel process sample on my drum rack, which is exactly what I want. You know, like samples can be you know, played around with, and if it only works if you drop the sample into the pad. If you drop one sample into this, let's say we drop a different one, then the other sample, the 2 samples will be different, but that could be beneficial if you want to layer things. It's really up to taste, honestly. And so that's how you can kind of, if you go through your defaults here, under user library, you can, you know, what you want things to look like as far as when you take audio and slice them to a new MIDI track, you know, how you want the drum rack to look like, you know, or if you decide to do a melody to a MIDI, if you don't want the crappy analog synth every single time, you know, like, what does it do? Yeah, you slice this to a new MIDI track, or no, slice this to convert melody to new MIDI track. The new MIDI track gives you like an analog with a MIDI effect rack, a sample delay, and a reverb, and it gives you kind of a default MIDI to melody, right? You can change that, make your own MIDI to melody, and then every time you play it, oh, that sounds horrible. Anyway, one other thing I was going to talk about, and I actually need that sample pack for this, to show what I was talking about. Saving default samples. So every sample has, if you look in your file explorer, let's go to this sample. If you look in Explorer, every sample has the original waveform or AIFF file, and then below it a copy as an Ableton Live clip setting. So it recognizes that this is the clip setting for this particular sample. It uses the sample name and then just adds ASD for the sample. You know, that's the clip settings, right? Things that, you know, you can save for the clip settings are like the segment BPM for the warp settings, the loop settings, you know, what you're going to do with that, signature, all that kind of stuff, whether it's high quality, RAM, things like that. The other thing is the pseudo warp markers things like that, where it recognizes your transients and things. So I've got a few pseudo warp markers that Ableton, when it analyzed, found all of these things and thought they were transients. And if I were to slice this to a new MIDI track, the built-in, and play it, it comes out with little snippets. But I don't want that, and I kind of want it to play out the whole note. So what I have to go in and do every single time if I want to, use a sample more than once, is select everything, hit delete, deletes all of the pseudo warp markers, right? Now they're all gone. And then this one, I don't like this pseudo marker, so I'll delete that as well. And then if I hit save, I'm going to get rid of it. And in theory, this hasn't worked out for me before. Every time now I bring in that sample, all those pseudo warp markers are gone. Right? The best part of this is I can go and slice a new MIDI track. Do it. And now I only have 3 slices. The first 2 long notes and then that little lip at the end. Now it does kind of play out a little bit at the end. So if I want, I can open it up and adjust it in here. And I need to adjust this. That looks good. So just the pseudo warp marker was just a little off, so that's fine. And now I have my something like that. And then if I want, I can just hit save. Saves this as a drum rack preset. LC electronic house. I'll do LCE piano sliced. Is that 8A? Okay. Perfect. Something to play around with later. I saved that I saved that on my favorites just for this thing alone, so I can clear it now. So I wanted to do that. So to recap, honestly, defaults are helpful. Once you get a hang of how you want your defaults to be, it will really improve your workflow when you're kind of figuring things out. To start with, it's really nice to have something just it's already set up for you. You don't have to think about it anymore or change it every single time. My biggest thing was like the EQs and the compression settings and some of the other effects that I had to constantly change every single time I used it, because I was doing the same changes over and over and over again, and it was just really tedious and took away from allowing me to be a little more creative and having to do the kind of the more technical stuff just to get to a point where I could be creative. And by then my creativity just fell apart or wasn't the exact same as in that moment. So it's good to have these types of things ready. You can do them right away, or you can, if you are not feeling creative or at all, but you want to do something constructive, certainly setting up your defaults or setting up a template. And you can also set up multiple templates and save them and then recall them You know, if you're in a kind of a different mood, so like you can have a house template where you can set up the tempo and you know, all the tracks that you're going to need for a house template. And then say you want to do some drums and bass, and you can set up a whole new template for that and have different elements and things ready to go for you. You know, set up multiple templates for whatever situation that you're going to need them in, or a template for, you know, like arranging a set and things that you're going to need for that, and you know, have them readily available for you, so that, you know, all you got to do is just go into preferences and change save default, you know, save current set as default. And then if you feel like you're in a month-long period where the only thing you want to make is D and B, then you're all set to go. Next month you want to do house, pull up your house template, go from there. Think of a whole folder in your user library of just templates, or tracks, or whatever you want to do. You know, it's really, honestly, entirely up to you. I'm just here to hopefully inspire, or, you know, kind of show people some of the things you can do that might be not readily visible, or a concept that might be kind of underground in a sense. So there it is. Hope it helps. If you'd like more, let me know. I feel like I'm doing these for myself, but in the end, hopefully helping someone. So please let me know if I'm helping at all whatsoever. And I'll catch you on the next video.